Welcome to Auburn Community Television on Wave Channel 20 and this episode of Meet the Artist. Today we are at the Nicholson Blown Glass Studio here in the beautiful foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. I'm particularly thrilled to be here today because Rick and Janet Nicholson were the founders of the Mother's Day Studio Tour. It started over 20 years ago when they had the idea to open up their studio to the community to show their absolutely awesome glasswork. And that has grown into the North Auburn Artist Studio Tour. It is held annually on Mother's Day each year and will be coming up, and the Nicholson Glass Glowing Studio will be open during the studio. And I believe that it is one of the jewels of the studio tour. I'm particularly thrilled that we are being introduced into their studio today so that you will be able to see a little bit of their spectacular work and maybe come on the tour to see it yourself. Let's go in and meet Janet. Hi, Janet.
Hi, Lucinda.
I'm so glad to see you.
Yeah, thanks for coming to our studio.
I think this is absolutely fabulous, and I really appreciate you opening up and letting us have a sneak preview of what you're going to be showing at the tour.
Anytime. Glad to have you.
Well, I thought that we would start out so that we could kind of look at some of the finished product, and then from there we can spend some time about the work that is being performed by your daughter Hannah.
Yes.
And her friend Alana.
Yes.
And what is Alana's last name?
Van Altena.
And I understand that they are doing more and more of the glass work now in the studio.
They are. This is their transition year to develop their own work, and then they'll be forming their own business next year.
That's exciting.
So you'll be able to watch them work during the tour.
Now, but we still have quite a bit of work that is yours and your husband Rick's, and which is all around us. So let's start a little bit by talking about some of the work that you and Rick do.
Okay.
And then we can also some of the stuff that Hannah and Alana have added.
Right, that sounds great.
All right, so right behind us is kind of what whenever I think of your studio, is kind of your signature type of pieces.
Right, the big platters. We've been actually working now 37 years. Oh, I'm sorry, 37 years here, 39 years altogether. And the big platters have become one of our signature pieces. This is from the landscape series. So they can either be created as a large wall grouping or in the metal, which makes them a bit more sculptural. And we have Chris Dillaway here in the studio working on the metal. So I designed it, and he does the welding. You could probably hear him in the background. He's working on a chandelier right now.
So when you go through the design process, so all of this is drawn out ahead of time as to kind of what you want to do?
Yes, well, you blend the colors when they're molten. So we come up with the color pattern we want, but in a way it's a lot like watercolor because you blend it, but you're never quite sure what's going to happen when they interact with each other and overlap. So each piece then is unique.
And then, as well as the metal work then.
We try to design each metal piece to fit the piece of glass individually. So we have certain designs we do, but each one will be different.
Well, this one certainly does contribute to the flow of this piece.
Thank you.
And there's also, you can't see it, but there's some actual cut work within the metal itself.
Yes, and that was Chris's idea. He likes to be a part of the artistic process also.
So you have some of the work that's in the stands, but then you have also a lot of wall hangings.
We do, We do the, mostly commercial and residential projects, which help sustain us as full-time artists with the wall groupings. And we also do custom chandeliers and lighting. Right now we're working on a bank up in Grass Valley with a large chandelier made with multiple pendants. So those are the kind of projects that keep us going.
Well, I was wondering, I was going to ask if you do a lot of commissioned work.
We do, mostly. We survive on the commissions.
Now, when you do the commission work, does the company or the individual come to you with an idea, or do you kind of sit down with them?
It's a little of both. You know, they are familiar with our work and they see our website, and then they have a certain area they want to work with. So I can do a Photoshop layout and color samples so we can narrow down what we're going to do specifically. And then they really kind of let us go with it once they've decided. So it's very fulfilling and still very creative.
Now, I know that this is a crazy question, and because I get asked it all the time, but I'm going to put you on the spot on it. When I look at your work and I see the color combinations that you do, which are just absolutely beautiful, they just tend to flow within each other. How do you come up with that color scheme?
Well, it's interesting because Rick and I have been partners now during all these years, and we consider ourselves full creative partners, but we each have different roles. And Rick has the glass blowing skills, and I do all the color work. So often we relate to, colors in nature. We started out as potters, and so as opposed to being extremely bright, flashy colors like you often see in blown glass, we prefer the more neutral, earthy colors that you might find in pottery pieces too.
Well, I have to say, as I love your purples and blues. I tend to be kind of drawn to those. And I'm sorry, I keep looking up at all of the work that you have behind. So it's not only these very large pieces, which are absolutely magnificent. You also have some beautiful vase work that you do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And I also noticed that you have one piece that is a sculpture, which seems somewhat unique in comparison to some of the others. There's a couple of the full body.
Those are really Rick's special things that he makes. They're very difficult because they're all freehand blown and hot sculpted. The glass is 2200 degrees, 1500 while you're manipulating it, so if you get something wrong, you can't just stop and start over. You have to go all the way through the piece. So those were his most difficult work. And he studied with 3 different maestros from Murano to learn the different sculpting techniques.
Well, that also impresses me because it shows how an artist is continually learning.
That's true. You always can keep learning, and you want to be inspired by something unusual that you haven't tried before, and that's how we got involved in this, adding the hot sculpting to the glass blowing. And we had an artist in residence program here last October where Karen Willenbrink Johnson came down and taught a couple of classes where Hannah was able to be her assistant and Lana was in the class, and everyone was very inspired to try to work on more of the hot sculpting techniques.
Now let's distinguish a little bit the hot sculpting versus the blowing. So what is the difference between the two?
Hot sculpting is really manipulating the glass, adding bits and pieces to create a sculpture, so you're not actually blowing on a blowpipe when you're making it. But we like to combine the two. So, like the torsos, for example, are blown, but then they're also manipulated, and that brings in the sculpting with different hot
tools. They just seem such heavy, and I haven't picked them up, but the heavy pieces of glass as well.
Well, the torsos are relatively heavy because you need that extra bulk in order to do the sculpting.
So that's a lot of weight that you are holding as you're putting this through in the kilns. Is that what we would call
the furnace?
The furnace.
And you cannot do it alone. You have to have an assistant. Sometimes 2 or 3 assistants when you're working on the really large pieces that are very complicated.
I know. I think I've been in here for some of your shows when the studio is open, and there are a lot of people involved in some of the pieces that you're doing.
Right. It's very heavy and it's very unforgiving, and so if a piece takes an hour and a half, it's like working at the gym for an hour and a half. So you have to have people kind of spell you with lifting the weight, and you have to move forward. You can't stop and go back.
Well, I think one of the things that I've always been amazed at in watching it too is it looks like it's so orchestrated, and everybody just moves and knows where they need to be at a given time.
That's true, and that's just practice. You have to use your peripheral vision and know what all the different steps are so you can be ready without someone having to ask you to be there. And so there's a rhythm to it. It's almost like a choreography.
It definitely, and you can see it. And today when we go through and we have an actual demonstration, I hope that you'll see some of that choreography that they are going through. It's almost like a dance is being performed and making this beautiful glass work. So you have some horses' heads that are on the same. Are they the blown glass with a little bit of the sculpting?
Extremely difficult. It takes, first you make a solid head, then you heat that up and save it while you blow the neck, and then they're attached, and then you also add the bits for the mane and the ears, and so those are very complex sculpting techniques.
Now, when I think about sculpting, I always think about using my hands to do it. Obviously, you can't touch hot glass.
Well, we have tools that we make with little balls and things so that you can manipulate from a distance away. But actually, Rick And the girls even wear gloves at times because the glass is 1500 degrees while you're working with it, and it radiates a tremendous amount of heat. But you don't want to get too comfortable using gloves because then you're not as aware of what's hot and what's not. So only when we're doing that sculpting where you have to be really close to the glass for a longer period of time. But you're right, you don't want to touch it.
And I guess over time you would learn that to use those tools to do what I would be thinking, oh, I want to use my hands to do. Wow. I guess it's kind of the extension of using a paintbrush, where you have to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Well, I also noticed today when we were getting everything set up and the girls were starting to do some of their work, that they were using a table to kind of roll things on.
That's called the marver, and that's a way to shape the glass, because when you first start, everything has to be very symmetrical, almost like throwing a pot on a potter's wheel. And so that helps it shape. There's several ways of doing it. And also, that's another way to apply color. So we start with the clear glass, the molten clear glass, and then you can add color. And usually then we case the color again in more molten glass, and so it becomes thin laminations of clear and colored glass. And so all of that color work is done before you start blowing, which is why it all has to be done small and very symmetrical before you actually get to your final shape.
All right, let's go back to how you add the color, because all right, so you start out with, have this kind of a tube or symmetrical.
Right.
So then how are you adding glass to it?
There's several different ways. The big platters that we use, we have colored rods that come primarily from Germany, some from New Zealand, almost like the way a painter would buy paints. And we take pieces of that off and preheat them so that when you apply them, it's almost like, honestly, it's almost like painting. They just kind of melt onto the glass. That's one way. And then we also have little bits of chips and frit, like I could show you this piece here maybe, if that works. You can see the little bits of texture on there, and that's because you're picking up little bits of pieces and frit. Also, we use powdered glass, and that gives this kind of color like you see in the flowers. This is one of Hannah and Alana's pieces.
Now, since we have this one, is this blown that we have here?
And so this is a combination of blowing and sculpting. The Cairn rocks are blown, and then the little Buddha is solid, and then those are made first. Also, the flowers are made first. Then when you heat it all up, make the rocks, then you attach all the different parts to it. So that combines the blowing with the sculpting. So there's many, many ways to color, and of course, just like painting, it's a lot of experimenting. What do you want to end up with? You know, what is your final process that you want to show? And so you have to think back, you know, what colors, how they blend, what size chips do you want to get your effect. So that's the fun part, really, is, you know, just trying to experiment and create. And the girls, we always, you know, do drawings. They're working on a cactus vessel right now, and so they have it all drawn out, and they've already pre-made the flowers this morning. So it's, they have to know where they're going before they get there. You can't change your mind midstream.
So if we look just briefly over there, what point are they now in the work that they're doing?
I think they're just getting ready to actually blow the vessel. They've got some of the color on, and yeah, we're getting close to where they'll be blowing the shape, and then they add the flowers after the shape is made.
Because we definitely want to cut to them when they start doing that. But before we do, as you said, that they were working on making the flowers that are going to go on it first.
Right, individually. And then they go into a little hot box at around 900 degrees, so they'll be ready to pick up. Anything over 1,000 degrees and it starts to melt and move again, so it's a very fine line. And then when they're finished with the piece, they go into the electric annealing ovens just under 1,000 degrees. The glass has to heat evenly all the way through the piece, and then they cool very slowly for 24 hours. So we won't actually be able to handle or see the pieces until the next day. So it's a little like a birthday present or something when you open the lid and see what you have.
Now, so I am assuming that not every single piece that is done actually comes out what you had in mind. Have there been times when you've actually ended up with something that you think, wow, this is even better than what I thought?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you have to be very open-minded about the shapes and the colors, and sometimes when you're experimenting, you come up with something that you didn't even expect, and then you can build your line of work from there. So that does happen. And there's a few seconds, you know, when something might be a flaw, we have to just throw it away or save it for another project, such as glass fusing.
So you do repurpose glass that maybe didn't come out as perfect as you wanted.
We do repurpose it. Some of it we have to recycle, but we like to try to repurpose it also. But we can't put it back in the giant furnace because it's only clear glass.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I just assumed that you just melt it down again and then just reuse it.
Well, we can reuse the clear glass, but once the color's in it, it would just turn to mud if we put it in there. So.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'm learning so much. I really appreciate it.
Good.
So I think it's time now to go see what the girls are doing, and
okay.
Very excited.
Right.
And I think maybe what we'll do is have you maybe talk through so that we can, as they're working on it.
Okay, that sounds good.
So join us over at the furnaces and seeing the glass work. So let's go through this process that they're going in through now.
Okay, they've already started the piece, which means they've gathered molten clear glass out of the furnace, they've rolled it in the color that they want, and they've gathered molten clear glass on top. So at this point it's almost like a light bulb shape. This is where it's very symmetrical and they've started blowing a little. So the next step is to gather again because they're making a larger piece, and so the more clear glass you gather on top, the larger the piece will be when they're finished. So right now they are marbering on that flat steel that we talked about for shaping. So again, they still at this point need to stay very symmetrical.
And that's just a process of rolling and rolling.
Yeah, I think of this part a lot like being on a potter's wheel, where you have to get that shape very symmetrical before you can actually work it and shape it.
Now she's put it into the furnace at this point, so how long does she know to keep it into the furnace?
Well, there's the furnace that holds the molten clear glass, and it's very exciting that we just bought a brand new furnace, so this will be a really good thing for the year for the girls to be able to manage. That's where they gather the molten glass, but now they're in the first furnace is just used for reheating the pieces. And that's just practice. There's no way to know how long to be in there, but they're watching the color of the glass because it comes out very kind of almost bright yellow, white hot, about 2200 degrees, and then as it cools it starts to turn red. And if it gets too dark red, then you're losing your manipulation. You can't do anything with it, so you have to go back in and reheat.
So because it gets more liquid, is the hotter it gets, or what's going on with the...
Yeah, there's movement. When it's really hot, there's too much movement, you can't control it.
I see.
So then you have to kind of cool it down by shaping it on the marber or with wet newspaper or something else like that. Then if it gets like so that you can't manipulate it, you can just blow and blow all day long as hard as you can, nothing will happen. You just have to go back in and reheat it.
So we're actually going to be seeing some blowing into this.
They'll be blowing as soon as they get the last of their molten glass on top.
Now she's continually turning this as it's in the furnace. And what's that achieve?
That's keeping it symmetrical. If you held it still, it would just drop right off because it's so fluid right now.
Well, now it's come out, and what are they going through now?
She's using the jacks to make a narrow spot against the blowpipe. So when she gets ready to take it off the blowpipe, that will be the glass is the thinnest, and when they pop it off, that's where they want it to pop. So that's what she's working on now.
And she's heating up these the tools.
Right, that's the jacks. They have to be hot or they'll leave marks. So
now I notice that they have glasses on. Is that for the eye protection? Or?
Yes.
And they look like just regular sunglasses.
Right,
Are they a little bit more than that?
These are didymium glasses they're wearing right now, which is supposed to help cut the sodium flare. But the glasses are a hard thing because you also want to cut the infrared. But if you get too dark, like a dark welding glass, you can't see what you're doing. And so it's really kind of a frustrating safety feature.
Well, see, honestly, I think I would be in a full-on
Right. Well, we have the hot
protective
suit.
suits.
We do have the
Okay.
silver hot suit, and that's what they use when they go to put the piece into the annealing oven, because you're holding on to it and it's radiating, so you have to kind of gear up with a face shield and gloves.
But from just what they're doing right now, then they don't have to have all of that.
Because the pipe is stainless steel and it's only hot
Okay.
about halfway down. And there is a place here where we can put the pipe on water, which helps cool it so you can get a better grip. Because if you're working way back here, it's really hard to control it. But if you can get a little closer, then you have more control.
And it doesn't get hot then to their touch, because they obviously don't have gloves on.
Right. Yeah,
So-
you learn real quick what to touch and what not to touch. I think the hardest part really is the steel, because maybe once you marver, there's heat in that steel, but you don't see it. And so you might touch it and go, oh, whoops. Whereas the glass is obviously hot. It's bright red, it's moving, so you know not to touch the glass.
Now, it's this very bright orange in color. Does that mean that it's going to be that color?
Oh, that's the heat.
Oh, that's the heat.
Yep.
So when will you actually see the color of the glass?
Well, not completely until you're all the way cool the next day.
Okay.
But as the piece gets thinner, as they blow it out, you'll begin to see the color of it. And toward the end, when it hits just around 1,000 degrees, you'll see the color.
Now, why don't we show an example of what exactly they're doing today, because you do have some of them here.
This is a new series they've developed,
Bring it here,
which we're very excited about, because it's so hard when you have art as a business to really spend a lot of time doing research and development. But that's what this year is about for them. They're able to experiment. So we've talked about this for, I don't know, at least a year. Made drawings, tried to figure it out.
Right.
But they finally have a product, I would say, that they can repeat and consistently, and it's a long time coming. Sometimes people say, well, how long does it take to make this? Well, maybe an hour and a half. But, it's years in the process, of learning the techniques. These are actually sandblasted after they've been completed.
I was going to ask how do you get the little dots?
Those are actually added on individually each. Yeah, during when they're hot.
Oh, when they're hot.
So it's very time consuming.
Is that the same for the inside of the flowers? Are those also done while it's hot?
Yes.
And what about the attachments then when these go on?
Well, this is also done hot. You can see there's they kind of put an indentation in for it to set into, and then they will pick up the flowers that they pre-made at about 1,500 degrees. They will attach them, and then they fuse in and they stay. So
now they do this in different colors, because we also have, let me get that.
Yeah, this is their best one to date, I would say. It's the largest one. It's very hard to work large in glass. It's very physical, very heavy, and they're just working in that direction to try to create larger pieces. This is a celadon, and I just think the flowers came out really beautifully.
The flowers are absolutely gorgeous, and it's funny because it's not a color combination that I would have initially thought would work, but boy, when you see it together, it works very well.
Yeah, and they do a lot of color experiments to come up with their choices, so it's fun.
So do you...
See, now they're blowing. Yes,
Okay.
Alana is blowing into the blow pipe while Hannah shapes the piece with the wet newspaper.
Now, the wet newspaper, that's something
That's one of my favorite tools.
Okay.
It's like having your hands on glass because it's flexible, but it's a thick pad of wet newspaper, so it won't burn your hands, but it's really it's very much like you have your hands on it. So you obviously collect newspapers, and then you're putting a lot of them together. It's not just a thin one. No,
sheet.
it's a pad.
Okay.
Probably about an inch thick.
Okay.
That you can fold and then just shape with it. Keep it wet all the time.
Okay, so it is. You actually then put water on it. That is really a neat idea. And she's working with the tongs. So now, when she goes and blows it, is that's what's creating the hollow part inside of this particular piece.
And it's not really hard to blow if all the temperatures are right. That's the trick. You know, if it's too hot, again, you'll lose control of it, and if it's too cold, you can blow and blow, nothing happens. So you have to get your temperatures just right, and then go slowly so Hannah can actually be shaping as she's blowing. If you're not shaping while you're blowing, it might just pop out one side, you know, like a piece of bubble gum or something.
So this is part of the choreography that we were talking about. Obviously a hard word for me to say. Of two people having to kind of mentally be in the same place when they're working on these pieces.
And that's doing it over and over again. You know, the girls really started with tumblers. They have a really nice assortment of tumblers for the tour. Those are like a shape that you practice and practice and practice, and once you get that down, then you can move on to the more complicated pieces.
Now they have known each other for quite a while.
Right, they knew each other when they were little kids in Montessori school.
And it's probably that friendship helps a lot in terms of this, of one mind that is needed for what they're doing.
They went to the same college too, Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz, and had different majors and different friends, but they still came back together to work on the glass. They were interested. They've been actually working with us for maybe about 4 years now, assisting and learning. So now this is the year where they're actually working together as a team. It takes a lot of time to get to this point.
Oh, I can imagine so. And you know, what an incredible opportunity for both of them. So now, what did they just do over here?
They are flattening the piece. The pieces we showed you, the cactus pieces, they come out very round when you blow the glass, but now you can see they're flat. So you can see again, they're flattening the glass on another pad of wet newspaper.
Now I noticed that Alana and Hannah kind of trade off in who's actually handling the glass.
Right.
Is that because one has a little bit stronger in doing one area, or is it?
I would say possibly, but Alana made all of the flowers herself earlier, and Hannah's doing most of the blowing. So I think it's just part of being a team to kind of support each other, and it kind of works out naturally to see who wants to do what. And they do trade off too.
Yes.
One becomes the assistant, one becomes the gaffer or the main glass blower, and they can trade off. Because that's a trick, to be able to work together. It's like Rick and I working together for 39 years, you know, and having our own roles and supporting each other. So you're not competing with each other, you're working together. That's not an easy thing to do.
Well, I noticed that she just put some additional moisture then on that newspaper pad, that's so that when they come back, it's got that moisture in there again?
Right, when you put the piece on it, it really sucks that dry, and if it's too dry, it'll leave marks on the glass, so they have to come back and wet it down so it actually almost rides on a bed of steam, actually, not really touching the newspaper directly.
Now it looks like she's using something that looks like a paddle on
That's
it now.
exactly what it's called. That's the paddle tool. And she's flattening the bottom. And she's getting ready.
So that is so that they actually can sit down.
Right. And you can see on the bottom, there's a mark here called the punty. And so she just flattened the bottom and getting ready to place the punty. And that's a solid rod attached to the bottom, so then they can break off the top where she's been jacking it thin, and then they can go back in and finish the top of the piece. So you finish the bottom, put it on the solid rod, and then you go back and
take this one off. Now, what determines the size? Is it by the amount of glass that they have?
Right, by the amount of glass that they have.
And so I guess experience will kind of tell you that
how much
to get a certain size.
Right, and that's tricky with, say, the pendant lights, where everything has to be the same size, because there's nothing really set in stone. You're still kind of just gathering and hoping to get the sizes the same. But with this kind of a sculptural piece, it really is not critical as to how many inches you are one way or another, so they have a little more leeway.
Well, I also, because as you said, they're actually trying to develop kind of their signature piece for the year, and there does have to be some continuity between those pieces.
Right. Well, and you know, you really can't just make a piece and then say, okay, I'm going to try something else. It takes multiple times of making the same piece until you get it to the point where you want it, and at that point, then you can go on and try different variations of that piece, and that's how you develop a really full, solid body of work. But if you just tried something and said, okay, now I'm going to try something else, you'll just never see it through.
No, and so there is a level of expertise that you have to bring to the piece as each one that you do adds to that.
Right, and it's always improving, always learning different techniques.
Now what is she doing?
We do a lot of torch work with the sculpting. When we first did our platters for years, we never had a torch. We didn't need it. But now with the torch, you can heat certain areas specifically, because they're reheating in that furnace, the first furnace, and it heats the piece basically all the way around equally. But when you're adding things like now, she's starting to add the dots.
Oh, okay.
The white dots. She only wants to heat that little area. She wants to heat the piece of cane that's leaving the color on there, and so that you have to use the torch specifically. But if you can get so involved in your torch work that you forget that the rest of the piece might get too cold and then it cracks. So that's Alana will go back in and reheat the piece. So they're really keeping an eye on the movement of the glass and the color in the glass, so they don't get distracted and get so involved in making the dots that they can't go back in and heat the piece all the way through.
Well,
and that's practice.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's watch them a little bit now.
Okay.
And as they go through this process of adding the dots to it.
It's amazing to me how symmetrical these are, because they're all randomly put on there. You know, she's not measuring anything. She just has a feel for where she wants them. It's very time consuming, but she has it down fairly quick. When she first started this technique with small birds, actually, you know, adding the beak, adding the eyes, and so this is like making a lot of eyes on one base. So she first developed the birds and then has gone to the cactus. Yeah.
I remember the first time I came to your studio. It was in 2013, and it was on the Mother's Day, and it was so hot that day. It was a hot Mother's Day, and when we came in here, and I just thought, how on earth do you guys even work when it is that hot?
Yeah, we've had even last year.
Oh, last year was terrible.
Yeah, we say we're going to work around the heat waves and not blow when it's over 100 degrees outside. But last year we had this, like, I forget, it was 27-piece platter series for a hospital. And that was right when it was due, when it was 100 degrees the whole time we worked on it.
Now it looks like you have both furnaces that are on here.
The big new furnace holds just a pot of molten glass. We have to melt the raw materials down weekly. But the other furnace they're going in and out of is just a reheating chamber. And we can shut that off when we're done for the day. But the large furnace stays on all the time. We don't shut it off.
Your gas and electric bills must just be click, 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 click.
Propane is very high.
Is it propane?
However, this new furnace is supposed to be way more efficient, so we're kind of watching the bills to see if that's actually true. And this last summer we also got solar. So it's not enough solar to take care of all the electricity, but it'll take some of that peak pricing off, because the expensive electric are the annealing ovens, since they have 4 different electric burners in there like an oven would have, but they stay on overnight, 24 hours to drop the glass down to temperature, so you use a lot of electricity. But that was our goal, to try to become more efficient.
Yes.
For the girls anyway, even though we won't be doing as much blowing.
I could see where there'd be difficult to be kind of even limiting the time in doing this as you're heading into the semi-retirement. But I think it must be rewarding to see your daughter.
It is. It's very rewarding. Especially Rick was extremely excited because I know he wanted to keep it going, but he couldn't put the hours in to justify paying the bills. I mean, young people now, when they start a glass blowing business, and there's more and more young people doing it now, but they come in as a co-op, so they're all sharing the expenses. It's usually in an industrial area in a city. So we're unusual in that we're in the country and we're by ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's yet to be seen if they can, develop enough work to actually pay the bills. But we're making it a very slow transition. It's cute.
So it looks like they're now back to the next stage of this, and why don't you explain that to us?
Yes, they're going to take the piece off of the blowpipe and put it onto a solid rod called the punty. And by doing that, they stick the piece here and then they will break it off. It'll chill it a little bit and cause a stress there, break it off, and then it will be stuck onto the solid rod. That allows them to finish the top of the piece. And this is when you're first learning, this is where you always lose them.
Oh, okay.
Because all the temperatures have to be just right. For this to stick, it can't be too hot. If it's too cold, it'll crack everything. And if this is not chilled properly, you won't be able to get it off. And if you do, maybe it'll come off with honey, maybe it'll crack the piece. So when you're first learning, you have to really make a lot of punties.
All right.
And as you get into the larger pieces, it's even more difficult because they become very unwieldy. They kind of describe it like having a fish at the end of or a whale maybe at the end of the fishing pole because you're trying to balance it. So they're doing it right now.
Looks like it is off of
they got
the
it.
other. Yes. Do you kind of hold your breath when you're going through this part?
Well, it is what it is. That's my philosophy. If you make it, great.
Yeah.
If you don't, then you just pick yourself back up and do it again.
So now this doesn't mean that it's done going into the heat. They're still putting it into the heat.
Right. Now they have to finish the top of the piece.
Okay.
So they have a shape in mind, and they're going to manipulate the shape to get the vase shape that they want. But the bottom is totally done now. So now they can just work on the top.
Now they've put all those little dots on it. Going back into the furnace doesn't alter those? Those stay exactly?
It could if you were in there too long. So that's the trick. You have to know just how long to be in there to get it just hot enough that you can come back out and work with it some more. So really, if you're in there and you're turning it and it begins to have movement, you have to get out.
Get it out.
And you can see there's larger doors. So as the pieces get bigger, we can open the doors. But that radiates a lot of heat out onto the glass blowers. So we have a shield in front where they can look through and block themselves from that heat.
She's still doing a lot of the turning process of this. And is that so it just doesn't get too hot on one side and you maintain that symmetry?
You have to keep it right. You have to keep the symmetry, right? You have to keep it so that it's lined up perfectly. And if it gets too hot and you're not turning it, it'll just flop over and then you won't be able to work with it anymore.
I notice in front of the furnace you also have a kind of, it looks like where they rest the rod that's going in it, and then that actually helps balance it as well as keeps it kind of straight as you're rolling it.
Yes, yes, it's a huge help with the physical lifting of the glass, especially on the big pieces. You can rest it there, and it's on a rolling yoke too, so you can go back and forth.
Now, this, as just came to my mind, is that this furnace, is there heat all around, top, bottom, all around the sides?
Well, it's very well insulated. It's like a big barrel. And so that holds all the heat in, and it will come out the front door.
But when they put the piece in, the heat is going to be
yes, on the
same.
inside.
Yes,
the heat is very. It's a little hotter in some areas. You can watch them go in a little further, come out a little further. So they have a little bit of control as to how much heat is hitting which part of the piece. But for the most part, it's an even heat all the way around. So then when they have to do specific areas, that's when they come in with the torch.
I would imagine that this is somewhat like getting to know your oven in your home, is that, where are the hot spots in the oven?
That's true.
Well, now at this point, it looks like they have shaped the top of this, or did you see it when it went in as to where they are?
And they're getting ready to put the flowers on, so that means they're nearing the end shape.
I am very excited to see this process, because this is hard for me to imagine exactly how they take these flowers and then somewhat infuse them, I guess, to what they have just done.
Yep, and again, the heat is very critical there. If the vessel is way hotter, say, than the flour, then they might crack the flour, because they have to be both about similar temperatures so that they stick.
Okay, so now the flowers were done ahead of time, and they are now in...
they're a little hot box, little color box that comes up to about 900 degrees. So they're not moving, but they're hot enough that they can pick them up and stick them on it.
Okay, so
actually right now what they're doing is still working on the vessel shape, the top of the piece. They're pulling it up and out, so it'll actually be similar to this piece. So now that it's blown, now they can fool around with the symmetry. They can make it asymmetrical, because they've got those wall thicknesses right where they want them.
Okay, so now Rick's getting involved as well.
That's right. We have the master here. He's really been coaching them, up to this point, and now we just try to stay out of the way.
So now they've put it again back into the furnace. Is that, so they've done this shape, and is this so that then they can bring more symmetry to what they've shaped, or?
Right, they pulled out the shape, but they're not done with it yet. So they have to heat it up so that they can continue to manipulate it.
Now, Hannah had gone on and put all of those dots on it, and so when they stretched out that, why doesn't that stretch those dots out and make them kind of an odd shape?
Well, it could. She's not pulling it too far, so they are actually keeping their shape. It's curious to watch, because like I said, each one is different, and I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do with that top, but it looks like she's making sure the hole is still open, because when she pulled it out, it closed the top. Oh, here's your answer. They pull it out. Now they're finishing the dots.
Now, okay.
There you go. Well, dots take a long time. You see, it is really exhausting to hang in there.
Oh, I can imagine.
For the whole hour and a half it takes to do it.
So now we're at the point when they're going to be attaching the flowers. So again, let's kind of go through what that process is.
Okay, well Alana actually pre-made the flower before we started this morning, so that takes one part of the step, jumping ahead a bit. They've been heating in the little color box at about 900 degrees. So next, Hannah takes the torch and heats specifically that one spot where she wants it to connect. Puts a little dent in it actually, so it'll have a place to connect. And then Alana's picking them up from the color box, and they have to work together to place it just the right time at just the right temperature.
Now, is there any extra heat that is applied at that point to the area? Or I guess we'll see.
There is a bit, yes.
Okay. So let's go watch them do this.
Okay.
She put it back in there for a little while to heat the whole thing up. What was the reasoning for that?
Well, that's, I think I mentioned earlier that you can get so focused on doing your flowers you forget to heat the rest of the piece, and then you can crack and lose it right there. So they have to really be multitasking, you know, thinking about how to get that flower on there, but also not letting the piece get so cold that it'll crack. And when I say that, that's just under 1,000 degrees, it would crack.
Just under.
Right, I know I say cold, but it's really hot. The piece has to be around 1,500 degrees while you're working with it.
All right, so we go back to... Wow, looks like that's what happens sometimes.
Oh yes, you can get all the way through a piece and still have issues, so you just have to go with it and move forward.
I assume that they make multiple pieces of the flowers for just to take care of this contingency?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I didn't watch her make the flower, so I don't know how many she has in there. But actually, it's nice with two. You know, maybe they need to stop. I don't know.
So she's again warming up her gloves so that she's going to be able to work with the flowers. Is that what's?
It looks like they're going to take it off with two flowers. Getting ready to take it off the honey.
Oh, okay.
And then it goes into the annealing oven.
Which oven is that?
Over here, these are all electric annealing ovens. They're up at around 900 degrees. And then the glass has to heat evenly all the way through and then cool for 24 hours. That's another thing you have to have in your mind. You have to know, is this annealing oven ready to go? And you have to kind of coordinate how you're going to get it in there.
All right, so she's got her hands ready underneath it.
Right, and Hannah's chilling the punny with a little bit of water. So when she pops it, that's where she wants it to break off. And again, this is critical temperature, just knowing how hot the piece is, and now she's getting ready to knock it off. And there it goes, right where she wants it.
Oh, how amazing is that? Okay, so now they're doing...
She's fire polishing the button on the bottom so it won't be sharp.
Well, that was certainly an exciting process to watch.
It was very exciting.
I'm kind of glad they did drop the flour as they were doing it, because it does show that not everything sometimes goes as planned.
Right, that's true.
And they certainly did recover from it, made a quick decision about what they were going to do with that piece.
Right.
So that makes it even more exciting to see how unique each one of the pieces becomes.
They are every time. Yes, that's true.
Well, you know, I thank you so much for having us here today. This was been so enjoyable.
You're welcome.
And it's just always such a treat to come to your studio and see just the vast and unique pieces that you have.
Thank you. Well,
and now that we've seen this process, I think we're all going to appreciate it even more.
That's true, and we hope that you can come on the tour. That's the most exciting. But we're also open by appointment too during the year.
So why don't you give the address where they can come and see you on the tour?
We are at the corner of Bell and Kramer Roads, North Auburn, with the driveway off of the Kramer extension. So there'll be signs.
I'm going to point out that even in the address book it does say 555 Bell. But it is actually off of Kramer, so when you're coming down Bell, you are going to have to make a turn on Kramer, or if you're coming straight on Kramer, just come straight through. Otherwise, you'll find yourself going up and down Bell trying to find it. Why don't you also give how we can get a hold of you by your phone number, and you have a web page as well.
NicholsonBlownGlass.com is our web page. Phone number 530-823-1631. or 530-320-8416 is the cell. And the girls have just gone live with their website. They're still working on it, but it's exciting. And I have to ask them what the address is, because I think I know, but I don't want to do it incorrectly.
Well, why don't we do this, is we'll get the information and we'll just put it at the bottom of the screen.
That's a good idea.
When it comes up on the television, that the viewers can see it.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the brochures are out, and we hope that you'll stop by the various merchants in town where you can pick them up. In the brochures, there's a nice map, and it has all of the 18 artists that are participating and a location for their studios. You can also go on our webpage, which is www.northauburnartist.com, and you can get a map there, and you can get details about each one of the artists and about the tour. In fact, this video will be able to be seen on our site. Another reminder is the tour is free. It is a self-guided tour, which is a great way to spend Mother's Day. So if you're thinking about what can I do with Mom, well, I hope you come and join us for this tour.
Right, both Saturday and Sunday, 10 to 5.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to Auburn Community Television and this episode of Meet the Artist.